Is good enough good enough? Or should we be discontent with less than? That's our topic today on this episode of the Educators Among Us podcast.
Welcome to the Educators Among Us podcast, where we share motivational messages and inspiring stories for and about educators. Your host, Scott Barron, is author of the critically acclaimed book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, and provides powerful insights and wisdom for those who heed the call to teach, coach, lead, and serve at all levels of education.
This is Scott Barron, and I'm honored to be your host for the Educators Among Us podcast. We just love to provide a little bit of insight and encouragement for those who answered the call to be teachers and coaches, administrators, school nurses, guidance counselors, librarians, those who work in the business office, those who work in sometimes in the enrollment office, or they raise money for schools. And there's so many other different roles that are part of a school system, whether it's a big school or small school. There's a lot of people who contribute to the success, to the influence, to the ultimately the growth path of students and of whole communities. And so we're thankful for the difference that you make because you care. You're in there making a difference in people's lives, even though it's hard and it requires sometimes change, right? It's the week of the time change. And for a lot of people, that's a miserable week. And for others, it's like, yeah, right. If you're in the United States, we like to change the clock. We just got to keep it as an adventure, right? And so we like to roll forward in the spring and then fall back in the fall. And so it's a time. Now I personally, I like it. I like having the daylight at the end of the day and being able to go out to sunset a little bit later because that's something that Tammy and I love to do is to go watch the sunset. And so wherever we are, we just love to see the ending of the day. It's kind of a celebration of what we've experienced and what God's done. And so that's just a meaningful time for us. We actually have a lot of photos we share called Sunset Therapy, right? It's a cool thing. But this time change is this is a significant week, and so I hope that you're able to adapt to that well. Some people kind of lose some sleep during that time, where they just kind of have to adjust to the way that the getting darker, or it's darker earlier in the morning, and then it stays a little lighter later in the day, and it just kind of throws us all off. But hey, thank you for being here and just being a part of the community of educators who are they recognize this is a calling and we make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And and sometimes when we, as a part of our roles, right, we have an influence around helping people figure out a way to be better. Even sometimes the word that we use a lot is excellence, right? And as we pursue excellence, there's different bars for that. There's different levels of what we would consider to be excellence, right? And sometimes we don't meet that bar. Sometimes we actually fail. Well, the interesting line from Abraham Lincoln that says, "My great concern is not whether you have failed, but whether you are content with your failure," right? And that's a powerful message. What is our discontent with failure, right? What does that do to us? What's our level of concern around that? It actually matters. And I had an experience. This is where the rubber meets the road. Right? I was at a tire store, right? So literally, this is where the rubber meets the road. I was at a tire store where the customers, of course, if you've ever been in a tire store, there is no shortage of urgency. Everybody's clamoring to, they either got a nail in their tire or they've got to get them fixed or rotated or something else, a new air. But there's a constant flow of people. Especially, I was there on a Saturday, which there's no greater demand on a tire store than throughout the day on a Saturday because everybody kind of waits up till that all throughout the week, and then there's just an urgency, right? So when they show up, they want help now, right? And it was fascinating watching the manager interact and artfully manage the fast pace. It was actually enlightening. It was interesting to watch him because it was obvious from his tone and demeanor that something was different about him. Something I could tell that he not only had a skill set, but he had an attitude. And it was really interesting to watch him. He didn't get impatient or flustered. It didn't matter what was coming at him. He had a composure, right? He didn't express frustration with constant questions, because he was getting questions coming at him from customers, from his colleagues that were trying to figure out what to do, how to solve problems, and it was just, and the phone was ringing. He was having to figure that out too, and this. Man, it was really just a great example of a guy who he had it together, right? He responded with kindness, and he was actually a patient teacher. I mean, people would come in and they would say, "I just want a tire," and he had to explain to them, it's not just like choosing a tire. You have to make decisions. You have to choose the kind of tire you want, and how long do you want a warranty, and what the manufacturer is, and the different features. And there's all kinds of questions that had to be answered. You don't just ask for a tire. And so he was very calm and composed as he took them through the options, even showing them sort of different diagrams and pictures in the computer screen and to help them and guide them in making the best decision, right? His attitude remained consistently respectful and persistently empathetic. He cared. He really cared. And I could watch him. You could tell from his body language that he really did care. And that was it's a hard thing to find sometimes, people who are like that, right? And so as I watched him as he walked this one customer, this one lady, they had finished the installation of her tires, and so he had walked over to her to hand her her receipt and her keys, and so he began to walk her to the door, and as he got to the door, he said something that was again just really connected with the bigger picture, that this guy was working for the mission, not just the paycheck, right? He was working for the joy, not just the job, right? Because he said to her as they approached the door, he said, "Ma'am, you're going to receive a survey shortly asking how well we did today. Now, if we didn't give you a 10 level of service, then we failed. And I want to get it right immediately." He drew a line. In that moment, he drew a line that said, hey, we are discontent with failure. And our line is very high. What we consider failure isn't just subtle, it's actually excellent, right? And that line is really interesting. It's like Ray Kroc once said, the founder of McDonald's. He said the quality of a leader is reflected in the standards they set for themselves. This guy was a really high level leader, a quality leader, because he drew a line, and what he articulated in that closing moment, it was what we call his critical line in failure, or his cliff, CLIF. His cliff, your cliff reveals our integrity. It reveals how honestly we are committed to excellence. And there's no shortage of schools that use that term on their websites and their core values and their mission statement, and lots of other organizations do the same. We can talk about excellence, but delivering excellence, that's a whole nother level, right? This is where reputation begins. It's at that line that reveals our tolerance for less than, right? Is it a 10, a 9, an 8, a 7? Where does it end, right? Does the quality level vary based on our mood and schedule and the intensity of the work? If we are sincere about delivering the best, if we're sincere about delivering excellence, right, the best possible experience for those we serve, well, then our bar has to be high, with consistent processes and practices that are needed to make it true. You got to back it up. You can't just talk about it. You have to deliver it day in and day out. And that's what excellent schools and excellent educators, that's what they do, right? They have an intolerance, right? They have an intolerance for compromise. They don't get that confused. The integrity of the righteous guides them, says Proverbs 11:3, but the hypocrisy of the treacherous destroys them. Yeah, the integrity of the righteous is what makes them. They deliver on their promises. They do what they say they believe in, right? And we discover who we really are in those pivotal moments of service to others. That's when it happens. That's when the rubber meets the road. Doing the best we can, that seldom has negative consequences, right? There's not a lot of downside to doing our best, but it almost always involves investment of time to practice, to prepare, along with a humble spirit. To have that level of intolerance for less than requires us to be able to listen to the feedback, to make adjustments, to be aware of what's happening, and to serve in the moment. Before leaving that tire store, I asked this guy, I said, where did you learn these habits of excellence? What I see in you, that doesn't happen by accident. You've learned this from someone. And I asked him a little bit about his work history, and I kind of got it right on some of the things where he'd worked before. But he said, it was the influence of my parents and teachers. Those are the ones who he credited the most for his example. So may your discontent with failure be a delight to those around you this week, my friend, as you set the standard high, as you demonstrate a commitment to truly doing what it takes, even if it means trying to follow up, to get feedback and fix the problems, to smooth out the potholes, to make it better, to deliver on our promises. That's what makes truly an impact as educators. And of course, in any field, it makes a big difference, even at a tire store, right? We had this conversation at a recent board retreat. We were meeting with the school board and helping them figure out their plans for the future and doing some strategic planning. And this was a big part of the conversation, is how do we establish within the core of at the board level and through the leadership, through our administration, through our faculty, and throughout the entire campus and campuses in this situation, how do we establish that mindset, right? That mindset that has a discontent with failure. It's hard, but it only happens by having very clear expectations. And then, of course, we teach, we coach, and we provide also accountability and love with those expectations. And that's how you grow and build excellence. And so hopefully that's a part of the journey for your leadership team. And sometimes that happens from the top and is best when it does. And sometimes it gets triggered by a division or department or a team within the organization that says, hey, there's a better way. Let's really develop that discontent with failure, right? So as you're going through this week, a coaching question to consider: did I do my best to be discontent with failure today? Did I do my best to be discontent with failure today? Hey, love him and lead him, my friend. This is Scott.
Thank you for joining us for the Educators Among Us podcast and for your courageous commitment to this noble calling. We get you and the challenges of this work. To stay connected with this community, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and weekly encouragement at educatorsamongus.com.